Welcome to this week's media briefing, which is on the faith response to COP27. On the plus side, it agreed a loss and damage fund for compensation to developing countries, which are suffering devastation from disasters like flooding caused by climate change. On the minus side, measures to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees failed, with no progress seemingly happening on the use of fossil fuels or the definition. And here to discuss the outcome of COP27 and reaction to it, we have Omar Shaikh, the Managing Director of the Global Finance Initiative, James Buchanan from Operation Noah, Alex Kirby, journalist and co-founder of the Climate News Network, Chris Manktelow from the Young Christian Climate Network, and Bino, the youth coordinator of the Green Anglicans South Africa organisation, who joins us from Cape Town. So turning to you, Omar, first of all, I know you have limited time with us today. Can I ask you, first of all, a simple question for your reaction to COP27? Because I know you said privately to email that you were trying to reconcile what happened. So just tell us for a moment, please, were you there? What did you see? What did you do? What were you expecting? And do you feel crushed as a result?
Right, so I was there. Thanks, Ruth, once again for inviting me to join. So I was there on the first week of COP. We had a series of events with our partners at Islamic Development Bank, CGI, Edelman's, around the role of finance. So my views come from the role of finance, and specifically reflecting on my kind of background in Islamic finance as well. Why it was, I guess what was underpinning the whole visit for me, what I took away at least, was it was great to see the variety of voices at COP27. The world was genuinely, truly there in all its different faces and all its beautiful colors and all its ages as well. And there was a great representation from women, from young people, and genuinely stakeholders from around the world. So there was that. It was fantastic to see that broad, inclusive tent that was there and everyone talking about this key critical issue. For us, I guess, in the finance world, what was particularly interesting, because we, as I mentioned before, we've done a project called the Edinburgh Finance Declaration, which brings together the faith views, particularly the Abrahamic faith views towards ethical finance, and highlights what they have in common. For me, there was a couple of things which came out of this, which, as I said, it was difficult to kind of reconcile. Number one, it's just so busy. It is just so much going on. The number of pavilions, the number of conversations that are going on, that it is really, really difficult to navigate that space. And for the financial services industry to find where exactly do we have a voice here, or where exactly should we be, and so on and so forth. So just to navigate that was particularly challenging. But also, the other thing that I felt was fascinating was there was a genuine sense of urgency here, that it was palpable. It was like, look, we really, really need to address these issues, and we need to prioritize some of the challenges in addressing such. And that's where you saw loss and damage being prioritized. And I think from a faith perspective, what's fascinating about that, we were talking about climate justice just a couple of weeks before COP at the Edinburgh Futures Institute event here in Edinburgh. And it's fascinating that ultimately, with COP27 in Egypt and COP28 in Dubai, what's critical is, unless this whole equation is balanced through justice, perceived or otherwise, you'll see things will fall apart. And that's why the loss and damage was put front and center by the Egyptian government before COP, that we want this conversation on the table.
Just to come in there, Omar, just for a moment, did it go far enough? Is it a promise that will be fulfilled?
Well, the details of it, of course, are not settled yet. We talked about 100 billion for how many years, Ruth, have we been promising 100 billion from the developed nations? They were very pragmatic in saying, look, we want the on the agenda, we want the outline to be agreed, but by COP28, so next year, I think those promises will be filled, or there'll be more details around that funding and how that funding will come in, and how they'll crowd in other kind of private sector money as well, and other blended finance structures. But what's fascinating is justice sits at the heart of that, which from faith perspective, I think was really interesting, that has to underpin nearly all of our activities, not just those on climate.
About your finance initiative, because you were trying to persuade companies and countries not to invest in fossil fuels. Is there any evidence that you're making any progress with your campaign?
One of our major initiatives we were talking about was in Islamic finance. It was the Global High-Level Working Group for Green and Sustainable Finance, which we launched together with London Stock Exchange, UK Government, and Ministry of Finance Indonesia. So what we've been actually trying to do with is promote and advocate for green and sustainable bonds through that mechanism using Islamic financing structures. That sits within the broader context of advocacy for green and sustainable financing and advocacy for net zero approaches, but also at the same time being a private sector led individual, led by individuals from the private sector. We are also very conscious that it's not that easy to do. And there are debates around divestment, whether it actually makes any difference or not.
Thanks, Emma. Can I just bring in James Buchanan at this point from Operation Noah? Because you've got a story actually out today trying to persuade churches to disinvest from fossil fuels. Can I ask you, are your campaigns connected in any way?
Yeah, so our report, which we've launched today, so at Operation Noah, we're campaigning for churches to divest from fossil fuel companies and to invest in climate solutions. And the report that we've just launched today is looking particularly at the positive investment side, so encouraging churches to scale up investment in renewable energy and other climate solutions. I think for us, these are sort of two sides of the same coin, really. We want churches and faith groups to avoid doing harm, and we know that the fossil fuel industry, the burning of fossil fuels, is a primary contributor to the climate crisis. And I think really was kind of also the elephant in the room in many ways at COP27 as well as it was at COP26. I think in terms of where churches are and how churches are responding, I think there's been a lot of movement in the last year and a half on churches divesting from fossil fuel companies. So most UK churches have now divested, which is great. I think the only major church denominations that are yet to divest are the Church of England, but they've got a sort of 2023 deadline for when they've said they'll divest from oil companies not aligned with the Paris Agreement, and also the Catholic Church. But increasingly, Church of England and Catholic dioceses are divesting as well. So we're sort of seeing that movement, that momentum in the churches for change. I think the other part of it, as I said, is around the positive investment, which, as I say, this report that we've launched today is focusing on. It's called Church Investment in Climate Solutions, Financing a Livable Future. And that's really vital as well, because, for example, the International Energy Agency has said that investment in renewable energy needs to treble in this decade if we're going to reach net zero emissions by 2050, if we're going to have a chance of limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees. So that part is really, really important as well.
Thanks, James. Just going back to Omar briefly, can you just explain to us something about this disagreement that there was at COP27 about the progress towards moving away from fossil fuels and the disagreement that arose over whether gas should be considered a fossil fuel or taken out of the equation, as I understand it? Were you party to any discussions about that, Omar?
It wasn't something I was directly involved in, but I think the context here, Ruth, is very important, is that what we're looking at, so the conversation around energy being specifically sustainable and green energy over the last decade or so, and the movement towards that, following the crisis in the war in Ukraine, Russia earlier this year, and the cost of living crisis, conversations around energy and indeed equally food and a few other select sectors have moved towards not just how green they are and sustainable, but also towards security and affordability. So accordingly, within that context, there's this whole push towards, and the transition conversation is that moving from A to B, this is a journey. So within the context of that transition and the challenges that we have now around supply and affordability and security, taking a lighter touch view towards gas, and because it's relatively less emitted compared to coal power, is really what's framing this. And I think it's very interesting and challenging for us, but at the same time, it's probably more realistic to take that transitional approach.
Thank you. Alex Kirby, just bringing you in here now. I think it's fair enough to say that you are, you've observed many COP gatherings in your time as an environmental journalist. And I'm wondering, as you heard the debate and saw what happened with the outcomes of COP27, whether you felt that, if anything, the world was stalling or going backwards in its commitment, especially over the resolution to get to 1.5, the 1.5 limit. How do you view what happened at COP27?
I think COP27 has actually damaged attempts to do something serious about the situation that we all face now. I mean, it was summed up for me by Professor Dieter Helm of New College, Oxford, who said COP27 gives the illusion of progress. It's been all about who should pay for the past, and it does nothing to deal with the causes of today's emissions. It may sound harsh to say it gives the illusion of progress, but I do think that it comes pretty close to that. I mean, James mentioned just now that Operation Noah is trying to persuade churches to disinvest in fossil fuels. Good for Operation Noah. Delighted it is doing that, but I think it sums up, it illustrates where we are, that even at this stage, when the urgency of the situation should be clear to everyone at the end of 2022, even now there are churches, institutions, which haven't grasped that we have to act, and act decisively to do something to face the reality of climate change. And there's that good man, I think he was a good man, the man who was in charge of COP26 last year in Glasgow, Alok Sharma, a former Conservative cabinet minister, no longer so now. But he said this, and if you saw it on television or on the spot, it will have, I think, stuck in your mind the way he delivered it. He said, emissions peaking before 25, as the science tells us, is necessary. Not in this text. Clear follow through on the phase down of coal. Not in this text. A commitment to phase out all fossil fuels. Not in this text. Omar Shaikh seems to me to have been an exercise in looking at what could have been, but not bothering to do anything very much about it. Yes, certainly the loss and damage agreement is worthwhile in its own right, but that was one part of what's happened, and it's about the past, as Dieter Helm says.
But the issue with what you're saying there, and this is very, palpable when you're on the ground in COP, is the scars of the past are very much live today in the global south. They feel it, they're dealing with it, and they're dealing with the repercussions of it. We're not here in the UK or in Europe to the extent that they are in the global south. And you simply cannot disaggregate the past and say that's all fine. That's okay. It's not fine, but it is what it is. And now forward looking, the trick is in the balancing act of bringing that, reconciling the two, and bringing everyone together on this journey. And that's what to me was fascinating. Absolutely right. I was intrigued as well. So why are we not focusing on the Glasgow COP stuff as well, and the 1.5, and everyone's saying it's on a life support machine, and that life support machine is rattling, and it's a highway to hell, yada yada. And it was really amusing when I was hearing the conversations from young people, climate activists. I spent a lot of time with them, and the conversations in the pavilion. To reconcile those two is critical in the negotiation, and to take everyone together. You cannot ignore the past and just focus on the future. Today is the result of what happened yesterday. And appreciating and reconciling that is critical to have everyone coming together if you want to make this planet for everyone, not just for you.
You're absolutely right, of course. And I may have expressed myself badly. I apologize if I've done that. I'm not saying that the loss and damage agreement wasn't worthwhile. It was enormously worthwhile. I've sat through many a COP where that has been a preoccupation, and understandably and rightly so. And I'm very thankful that we have got that agreement now, at long last, after 30 years of trying to reach it. I'm not putting that aside. I'm just saying, if people are coming home from Sharm and saying, well, we got loss and damage at last, COP27 was worthwhile. Loss and damage is important. Thank heaven we have got it. But it is not it's not something that is actually going to help much, if at all, in tackling what is happening now, and what is happening ever faster and ever more damagingly. That's my concern.
But it sits at the heart of the concerns of many of those stakeholders from those regions. Alex, that's the issue. So post Glasgow, it was a big issue actually that came out for those who want to say, oh, we got nowhere on loss and damage. And you know better than me, Alex, how many years we've been asking for this, people in the Global South have. So actually, the fact that the Egyptian government said up front that this is going to be part of the conversation and a priority agenda was intentional. Otherwise, if they hadn't done that, then there'd be no resolution and no further progress since Glasgow on loss and damage. If you have $40 billion worth of damage in Pakistan due to the floods, 30-odd million people displaced, and you tell banks and financial institutions in Pakistan you need to divest or stop financing coal power plants, they're going to be like, hold on a minute, how the hell do we progress, and let alone how do we deal with this damage that we've just incurred through these phenomenal floods? So you're absolutely spot on, Alex, and I'm with you, but the reality is priorities of those conversations and just the sense of feeling that was there from the stakeholders in the different pavilions from the Global South and the young people as well was a sense of injustice. And I think that's what ended up prioritizing that discussion.
Omar, I think you and I are in much the same place on neither you nor I think has mentioned the fact that the COP process does not have a very good record of actually coming through with realizing the pledges it's made. I mean, if you look at the Copenhagen COP in 2009, which agreed $100 billion a year, wasn't it, for developing countries? We still haven't reached that yet in 2022. So I don't hold out complete hope that this agreement from Sharm is actually going to lead to very much, or not all that it says necessarily. And I fancy you may say the same.
Thank you, Alex. And thanks, Omar, for the time that you were able to spend with us. You mentioned that you met some young people at COP27, and we do have Bino on the line from South Africa. How do you reflect on the conversation that we've just had about the importance of the loss and damage agreement from COP27? Was it the key thing, the most important thing that you were expecting to happen at the conference?
Thank you. As an African, it was our top agenda, simply because it's somehow daily bread for us, where we continue to see and experience trauma, from children to adults, where trauma it is. I mean, during our time at COP, there were again small floods in KZN. Families are displaced, and because of our economical balance, it's not just loss and damage where you claim insurance. Whatever we lose touches us emotionally. If we lose, imagine losing lives, that's worse. Parents are having to bury their children. Even at COP, when we were there, I mean, Mr. OS was explaining his engagement with young people. You could see the pain in people's eyes, where children who were supposed to be in class are not in class and saying, I've risen because I've lost a parent, I've lost a sister, I've lost a brother, and this thing is not going away. The pain within people is there. It's not just something simple. That is why I say, for us in the Global South, especially for us in Africa, is daily bread, which is not right, because we are not causing this. We have not caused this. And as a faith community, we need to have these conversations. We need to understand that Alex, his background and his context is not the same as mine, but there needs to be a bridge that we build so that we understand one another. And I think this is a platform where COP gave us that platform. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your contribution there, Bino. But just to turn to Chris Manktelow from the Young Christian Climate Network in this country, in the UK. And I know there was a lot of, you could describe it as jubilation on the social media feeds about loss and damage. Was that the key thing that young people were looking for from COP27?
I mean, we were pleased to see the fact that they were talking about setting up a loss and damage fund, because that's something that's happened before. That's something that that they've been talking about for 30 years, and they've never made any progress on that. So that was encouraging to see that. And again, it's to do with that justice kind of angle of the feeling that there are that those who are suffering the most from the effects of the climate crisis at the moment have done the least to cause it, and there needs to be work done there to repair relationships between higher income countries in the global north and lower income ones in the global south. But I guess as well, we were still, at least here in the UK, frustrated to see that there hasn't been enough progress on sort of addressing the causes of climate change as well. No mention of phasing out fossil fuels, concerns about whether people are even want to aim for the 1.5 degree target, when that's really, really important for, countries on the front line of the climate crisis. So yeah, there were still many frustrating things about the final kind of agreement that came out of COP27.
Can I ask you to compare the mood, if you like, amongst the young campaigners in the UK now, after COP27, compared to COP26? We did a lot on COP26 in Glasgow. There was a pilgrimage. We spoke to lots of young people. There seemed to be a real head of steam, a passion to change, to get to limit the temperature and make sure we were reaching it. But there seems, after COP27, to be not that air of enthusiasm, progress, or anything, as though the passion has gone out of it. Is that correct?
So I was saying, in the run-up to COP26, as you said, there was a lot of energy amongst climate activists in the UK, including those who are Christians or of a background like us. We felt kind of quite tired afterwards, just because we'd done so much. But I think within the campaigning community, there's still a lot of energy, and a lot of people want to see change. They want to see climate justice done. But I think within the UK more broadly, there's been a bit of a shift away in focus from the climate crisis. That's partly just because the COP was held in Egypt and not in the UK. And I think too, it's partly because of maybe some of the kind of rhetoric around the war in Ukraine, and this idea that we need to, exploit more oil and gas in the North Sea and things like that to, maintain energy security and things like that. Questions around the cost of living crisis and that sort of thing, that has maybe taken away some of the kind of media attention from the issue, but we still care about it as much as we did.
Thanks very much. James, I wonder if you want to come back on that, talking about the passion and so forth, and the future of your campaign post COP27. I know you've got your press release out today and your report, which is about, churches and investments and so forth. But what does the next year of campaigning look like to you as you lead up to the next COP28?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I really wanted to say, I think Chris and the Young Christian Climate Network have continued doing brilliant work this year. And for example, around the Lambeth conference, where they were sort of really encouraging church leaders globally to speak out on these issues and to take action, and also, for example, campaigning for the Church of England to divest as well from fossil fuels. So I think in the next year, I think there's going to be some really important work to be done to continue speaking out against, for example, against new fossil fuel developments in the UK. Antonio Guterres has said, the fossil fuel industry is cynically using the war in Ukraine as an excuse, really, to sort of pursue new fossil fuel developments, because we know that there's many times more known fossil fuel reserves than we can burn if we're going to have any chance of limiting global heating to 1.5 degrees. So I think it's really vital to continue campaigning on that. And as I said, 2023 is going to be a really big year on divestment in the Church of England, especially. And so I think it's really crucial to keep up the momentum there. I think also for us, the sort of positive investment side that I've mentioned, investing in climate solutions, it's also an opportunity for churches to be prophetic on these issues, to kind of put their money where their mouths are, and to and I think by divesting from fossil fuels and investing in climate solutions, I think churches can really then speak out with integrity on the climate crisis, because they can say to the governments and so on, we're doing this ourselves, we've sort of taken these steps, and we need you to take action. And we saw earlier in the year, over 500 church leaders, including Rowan Williams, write to the government, and they called for no new fossil fuel developments and called for increased investment from the government in energy efficiency and renewable energy to tackle the climate and the cost of living crises, because these crises are very much interconnected. So I think those voices need to be heard. I think the church and other faith groups really need to continue speaking out on these issues.
Alex, can I just bring you back in as you reflect on our discussion so far? I don't know how many COPs you've reported on over the years. Must be several dozen. But the same question, I suppose, as to James. What is going to happen in the next year to make things accelerate, or to make sure that the target that's already been set is reached? What can happen?
Most of what I keep hearing at discussions of this sort is what I've been hearing since the early 1990s. And we have got to get beyond that. I think one thing that we need to do probably is to realize we're not going to stop global warming. We're not going to learn to live with it until we accept that we're really on a spectrum, on a seesaw. We can't solve it. We can't surrender to it. We have to accept that all we can do is try to adjust to it and to do the best we can. People sometimes say to me, if you're really as gloomy as you appear to be, why do you go on doing anything at all? The idea of going on doing anything at all when you don't think you're going to get anywhere near as far as you need is that everything that you do can mean that the hopes for the next generation are going to be a bit better than they would be if we did nothing at all.
Thanks very much, Alex. And I think on that note, I think we should draw the discussion to a close with thanks to everyone who's joined us on the panel today.